3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to DBAD, the Don't Be a Dickhead podcast. This is episode 11. I'm John Gilbert.
I'm Ian Thompson.
I'm Alex King.
Welcome along. And today we are going to be talking about bystanders.
Yes.
We are.
So we're wondering if we've maybe jumping ourselves in at the deep end intellectually here after 10 episodes of talking about pubes and feuds with neighbours and so on, that we're actually going to talk about a bit of psychology, but we may have some rather silly examples to accompany this. So Ian, you suggested that we discuss the bystander effect, so therefore it's only fair that I hand over to you to give us an excellent introduction to the topic.
Christ. No, so this is just a couple of weeks ago I pre-ordered a book on Audible called The Bystander Effect by Catherine A. Sanderson. And it occurred to me as soon as I pre-ordered it, because it was something that I thought might be quite interesting anyway, but as soon as I pre-ordered it, it actually occurred to me it fits in well with the podcast as well. Because, we talk about dickhead behaviour and we talk about what people do about it and how people can call others out on their dickhead behaviour. And I thought sort of the bystander effect really speaks to that and sort of tells us about that. I thought it'd be a good thing to talk about. I'll be honest, you say that we're slightly ill-prepared for this podcast. I haven't read the book yet, or listened to it rather. It's because I'm already listening to 2 other books at the moment, and I wanted to get at least one of those finished before I started this one. Added to the fact that this one only actually came out last week. So I haven't read it yet, but I have sort of read up on the book a little bit, and I looked into other elements of the bystander effect as well.
I remember doing the bystander effect in A-level psychology.
There we go.
And it was based around the case of Kitty Genovese.
Yes.
And it's a bit of a sad story, this one. Well, you guys know it, but very briefly then. This was a lady who was murdered outside of her home in what was purported to be in front of up to 30 witnesses, and nobody called the police and did anything about it. And it was really trying to break down what happened in that case as to why it happened. I think actually subsequently they found out that there was a bit more to this case than first met the eye and was reported in the press, but still it did ask an interesting question about why, as a society, why did we let that happen, and what could we learn from it to make sure that we don't let anything like that happen again.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is, because obviously a murder of someone is well beyond dickheadery, but I think what came out of that was a lot of like psychological and sociological studies that looked into this bystander effect, and I think those are the sort of things that do speak to the act of dickheadery.
They do, and I think it's quite an uncomfortable one in a way, because like all of our topics, I'm definitely guilty of dickheadery when it comes to this. Particularly that thing about the principle of diffusion of responsibility, which is when something happens in front of a group, it's a part of our brain that says somebody else will deal with this so I don't have to. And I've got again, not a funny story, but a few years ago I was walking down Oxford Street and a motorbike was travelling really, really fast and lost control and skidded off and ploughed into some pedestrians at the other side of the road when I was waiting to cross. And a few people went flying up in the air and so on, and obviously people were gasping and so on. And then I and a group of people crossed the road to check that everybody was okay, and I was so thankful that other people were already tending to the wounded at that point. So that I didn't have to, because I didn't want to get it wrong. I didn't want to take responsibility for a situation that I couldn't understand. But so I left the scene quite soon afterwards, and I'm sure there's probably something I could have done, but I just looked around and thought, well, all these people seem to have a better idea of knowing what they're doing than I have. So I suppose it was a bit dickheadery, really. That if I'd have stuck around, I probably could have done something to help the situation, but I didn't.
I've definitely been driving. I'm trying to think when, but I can definitely picture myself driving along and, something happens at the other side of the road or whatever, like someone collides with a bike or something, and the person in the car's with me has gone like, should we stop? I'll be like, no, you're right, they'll stop, They'll stop. I mean, and they have done, and I seem to think I've sort of looked in my rearview mirror and just checked that someone has stopped. But I've actually even said it, like they'll stop. So I've noted a few things down for this episode. There was actually a study done at New York University, and they got groups of students, and they had them walk past. Now, I'm presuming the students didn't know this was going to happen, but they had them walk past a man who was slurring his words and asking for help. And some of the students were on their own, some were in groups, some were in pairs, whatever. 85% of them helped and stopped if they thought that only they could hear him.
Yeah, I read this one. Yeah.
Only 31% of people stopped and helped if they thought other people could hear him as well.
I found that crazy, but...
Yeah, which is interesting.
Yeah, because I wouldn't think that it would make that much of a difference. Obviously, when you read all of these sort of experiments and things that have been done, I think it's so interesting. So I might actually read the book that you're mentioning, Ian, because I'm really interested in it.
I love that we're doing a podcast before we've read the book. Maybe we should redo it and correct ourselves.
Well, we should redo it and try and get Catherine A. Sanderson on.
Understand why, because obviously we can have these stats, so it's like 85% of people would help and 31% would, like, with the difference, but it's understanding why our brains work that way, I guess, what's interesting to me.
I don't have any notes on this with me, but from memory, there's we do a bit of an assessment of the situation, I believe, where we look at the severity of the situation, our capability to deal with it, but also the whether or not that person deserves our help.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that we consider.
Yeah.
And I also seem to remember that we're more likely to help people who we identify as like us.
Yeah.
So that could be to do with your race or your gender or your age profile or some form of commonality. And if that commonality isn't there, you're less likely to step forward.
It was whether or not they feel the person is deserving of help, the competence of the bystander, whether they feel they can do anything, I presume, and the relationship between the bystander and the victim, which is how easily you identify with the victim and whatnot. Those are the three things that they felt it went on. But then also in Catherine Sanderson's book, she talks about how you can try and change that as well. And she talks about re-individualisation. So she talks about the fact that if you can remind someone of who they are, then they are more likely to do that. So things like our podcast actually will maybe help people to change that behaviour and whatnot. There was a study done about this re-individualisation at Harvard, I think it was, and where they gave people, it wasn't just students, I think anyone could take part, they gave you a test, and they said for every question that you get right, you get given $1. And they said, however, you're going to mark it yourselves. You're going to score it yourselves, and whatever you score, you get $1 for every point. Half of the group, they made them sign a honesty statement before they did the test. The other half of the group, they left the honesty statement until the end. 79% of people cheated who signed it at the bottom, whereas of the ones who signed it at the top, only 37% cheated. So it showed that if you reminded people of who they were at the beginning of the test, before they did it, they wouldn't cheat. But after they'd scored it all, if then you reminded them who they are, there was a lot more cheating going on.
I guess that's our intent to behave in a particular way and being true to our word.
I think it's easy to tell yourself that you couldn't have helped in that situation, or that even though you might have been able to do something, I think just being ignorant to it and just maybe convincing yourself that, whereas if you actually shine a light on it to yourself and think, well, you could have actually helped in that situation. I don't know, I think we're quite ignorant to things, and I think we like to think that we are, and I think you are a good person, and I think there was a fact in there as well, that there's a fact and fiction in that thriveworks.com, and there's a fiction that says if you're a kind person who cares about others, you won't fall victim to being a bystander. So that's not the point that you don't care or that you don't want to. It's obviously that the impact that it does have when more people are around, I guess, psychologically, than just what you want to do to help, if that makes any sense.
It can go wrong though. I got it wrong a couple of years ago. And actually, before I get onto that, there was another study, it's tenuously linked, done by that well-known scientist, the Burger King. And they did it, this wasn't a scientific study, this was a marketing thing, but it was showing that people were much more likely to complain if their burger was a bit beaten up than they would actually intervene if a child was being severely bullied within the Burger King restaurant. Now, yeah, I'm a bit cynical. That was a piece of marketing rather than a piece of research. But a couple of years ago, I was in a McDonald's in Leeds, and I saw some teenagers picking on an old guy, and I intervened and just said, lads, just leave him alone, come on, pack it in, kind of thing. And then I nearly got my head kicked in as a result of it, because I think that's what they were doing. I don't think they were actually baiting the old guy. They were just trying to see who would challenge them, who would be more of a kind of a worthy adversary almost. And I had to back down. It was really difficult because I did my mental calculation at that point, which was, right, if we have a fight, I might win or I might lose. If I lose, I've just had my head kicked in by a load of kids. If I win, I've just assaulted some kids in front of loads. I mean, I'm better to just swallow my pride and leave in this situation. By which point the old guy had buggered off, so he was fine. So actually, the situation was diffused, but it could have gone wrong.
They just went out hunting down non-bystanders.
Yeah, but don't do that. That's what the world needs.
Back to like school days and obviously like bullying in schools, and I like to think that a lot of the time I did sort of intervene if I ever saw anything, but I think there will have been times where I maybe did see something happening. 'Cause the school that I went to was quite rough and there was quite a lot of fights and things. So there was times I could have probably intervened when I didn't, and it really frustrates me now to think back to it. But it's like you say, it could have got a lot worse for me if I'd have got involved.
I used to intervene all the time. They would call me dweeb protector. But then also I would be a hypocrite because I'd be a dweeb protector one day and then I'd just be horrible to somebody the next day.
Dweeb protector, that's brilliant.
I'm complex.
But I think that will have happened a lot in school.
Well, I think when you're at school, you're still finding your own place and going along with the crowd is part of it. And I think this is where one of the secrets to being a bystander who actually acts upon it is actually recognising those people. We see it where, people stand up to terrorists. This happened recently where people have fought the terrorist and they get kind of heralded as heroes. It did get a bit murky recently when it found out that one of the guys that fought the terrorist was a convicted murderer himself. And as a society, we weren't quite sure whether we should be saying, let him free, or just going, yeah. Somebody had to step up to it. I did a similar thing once to tackling terrorists.
With a narwhal tusk?
It wasn't as cool as with a narwhal tusk. He was from Hull, wasn't he, that guy?
Was he?
I seem to think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we're a certain breed. I was in Benidorm, outside of a bar called Shooters, with my younger brother. I think we were 17 and 15 at the time, and we were waiting to get onto a pool table, and there were 2 kids on before us. And this guy came across, just watched the kids playing pool for a bit, and then flicked a cigarette at them, and then just kind of carried on. And now I had this other bystander influence called alcohol in my system at this time, when I stood up and called him a dickhead and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Don't be a dickhead." I said, "Clearly that's an act of dickheadery. Beyond dickheadery, you could have injured one of those children," or whatever I said. And kind of like went across the square up to him, to which he then pulled a gun out from his jacket, showed me that he didn't point the gun at me, but he showed me that he had a gun. And then he kind of started walking off. And then to which my brother and I looked at each other and we just went, yeah, let's get him. So we kind of chased after the guy, who then saw that we were running after him, which he clearly didn't expect. So he started running, and we lost him around the corner, which is probably a good thing, because I don't really know what our plan was. To capture him, take his gun off him and shoot him was probably not... I mean, I wouldn't even know how to fire a gun. So yeah, I think that was a bit of drunken bystander effect behaviour. And I'll round this story off by telling you that a few hours later, I was mugged at knife point, but didn't resist at all. Just kind of went, you can have all the money. I wasn't feeling very heroic at that point.
You'd had enough for one night, I think, at that point.
So they could have the rest of my money off me. Yeah, that was too much action.
Guns are okay, but knives, absolutely not.
Absolutely not. No, they can stab you with those.
Nice. You're never about to insert a gun into anyone.
Absolutely. I hope not.
I
Maybe that's what we'd have done if we'd have caught up with him.
Oh, okay. We've had a bit of a chat about the bystander effect then. Do we want to talk a little bit about how that relates to dickheadery?
I think that if we're going to be successful in our mission to reduce dickheadery, not only do we need to hold ourselves to account and think about our own behaviour and change our behaviour, as I seem to reflect on every single show that we record, we also need to step up and challenge other behaviours, which makes us the bystander in that effect. Now, obviously, that's if you see somebody being bullied, I'd like to think that you would step forward, but it could be something what might seem a little bit more minor, just something that somebody's doing that is selfish or is, I don't know, a bit racist, a bit sexist, those kind of thing, and just kind of holding each other to account. We've got to understand that somebody's got to do it. Let's not always leave it to somebody else to take action.
Absolutely, yeah. I've had it since we've been doing this podcast. I've had quite a few friends text me and say like, "Oh, really enjoying it," and just listen to them all and whatnot. And then they've also texted me saying it's also made me realise what a dickhead I am. And I think, as well as that just been quite funny, and I'm making all my friends miserable. Then also, I think that's an important thing because at least people are thinking about it. And they're thinking about how they affect other people as well. And it's that re-individualisation thing as well, isn't it? Remind people of who they are, of what they're like, reflect on past behaviour, and you can change your future behaviour. So in some small way, this podcast is saving the world by reducing the bystander effect and reducing dickheadery. One friend at a time.
Yeah.
Ooh, you sound like a prophet from the Church of Dickhead.
Here endeth the lesson.
And so we'll revisit this as a topic at a later date because we've just scratched the surface on it there. But I think in the meantime, it's something that we just need to think about. If you're going through any kind of situation where you are a bystander, project ahead to the future and think, did I do the right thing there? Because that's really what we're trying to achieve with this.
Stay safe, folks.
3,
Look after each
2,
other.
And remember, don't be a
Don't be a
dickhead!